What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. With me, as always, is Pastor Leo. We are here to help you take a next step in your relationship with Jesus. We're so glad you're here. Hello and welcome to episode 120 of the Grow Podcast. My name is David. I'm very glad that you're here. With me is Leo. Hello, Leo. I'm glad
everyone.
You're here also.
Me too.
Because otherwise I'd be the only one here.
Right. I'm glad
I think everybody's glad that you're here. I think we can all agree.
Right.
We're glad Leo's here.
I'm the reason the world exists.
Wow. I feel like this might be your last time on the Grow Podcast.
That took a turn.
Oh, boy. Well, other than feeling very self-confident right now, Leo, how are things? How have you been?
I'm great. I'm loving the weather. It's starting to get a lot.
It's pretty great.
It's finally, because I don't like the August weather where it's like you don't know what's going on. Like it's cold and then it's hot and then it's cold and then it's hot. I don't like that. Yeah.
Like in the morning, it's way too cold to go out without like pants and a jacket on, and then in the afternoon, if you're not in shorts and a t-shirt, it's like miserably terrible. That's the worst. Yeah, this is my wheelhouse, and it's been rainy too. It's like double my wheelhouse. Yep. I wish it could just be cool and rainy all the time.
You know that band Garbage?
No, I don't.
They have a song like "I'm only happy when it rains."
Oh, I feel like I've heard that song before, though.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think I knew it was by a band called Garbage.
Right. I think that was popular in the 90s?
It sounds like it'd be
something
a 90s
like that,
band. A grunge band in the 90s would call itself Garbage.
So, yes.
We're Garbage. We'll be playing in Michael's garage next weekend. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep. This kind of weather always reminds me of that song.
Yeah. I'm wearing my Twins stuff because my Twins, on the day we're recording this, yesterday won their first playoff game in almost 19 years.
Congratulations to the Twins.
I had not met my wife the last time my favorite baseball team won a playoff game.
Wow, that has been a while then.
So yesterday was fun. Watched it with my 6-year-old son who loves the Twins. It's a very good time.
Huge win.
Yeah. Hopefully a whole bunch more. And then we'll break off and do a different podcast where I just talk about the Twins for like an hour and a half. I don't think
Twins podcast.
Would you join me for a Twins podcast, Leo?
They're called Twins for a reason.
Because of the Twin Cities.
Because of the Twin Cities.
Not because you and I are twins.
Right, no.
So here's a question. If you and I are brothers in Christ, if we were born on the same day, are we then twins in Christ?
I believe
and
so.
And if so, should we refer to ourselves as such?
But then it's not just the two of us, so that...
It'd be right. Then it gets real, like Octomom type situation.
Yeah. Then it gets really, really weird.
There were there was one girl in my church growing up that was born on the exact same day as me. She would have been my twin sister in Christ.
Well, there we go.
I've never thought about that before, but I feel like we need to deep dive it.
Let's explore that.
Instead of that, excuse me, I've got a little bit of a cough. At home, I will try not to cough directly into your ear. But if I do, that, it happens. You'll forgive me for it. Paul probably wants you to forgive me.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Paul's a fan of forgiveness. Yeah. Maybe we'll get to that as we continue our study of Romans. Classic transition right there. We are continuing our study of Romans here on the Grow Podcast. In fact, we're jumping into chapter 9 today.
Yes.
So if you have missed any of the previous weeks, we encourage you to check those out before you listen to this one, because it all builds on itself. It's one continuous book or letter, I guess, technically, that was written, and not intended to just be taken out of context. So make sure you're reading along with us. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel or to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. New episodes go up every Monday, so you'll get notified when those go live. Like I said, today we're going to jump into Romans chapter 9. We're in the first 13 verses 1 through 13. And kind of like how we normally start, Pastor Leo, why don't you kind of give us the overview, kind of what we're gonna walk away from today.
Okay, so for this one, we're going to break Romans 9, verses 1 to 13 into 3 parts. Verses 1 to 5, Paul talks about his great love and concern for his fellow Israelites. He especially talks about how far he is willing to go for them.
I have some questions about that in a little bit.
Sure thing.
We'll get there.
In verses 4 to 5, he lists some benefits that were given to the Jews. Verses 6 to 13, Paul talks about his disappointment because even though God gave the people of Israel so many opportunities and blessings, they still didn't follow him. So that's the breakdown of those verses.
Well, let's kind of do the podcast in 3 parts then. So let's start with verses 1 through 5.
All right.
You kind of talk to us a little bit about that, and then I'm gonna jump in at some point and harass you with thoughts and questions.
All right, see you next week. Okay, so let's start. All right, so Paul begins by expressing the burden of his soul over the condition of the Jewish people. Paul also says that he is ready to accept being separated from Jesus if that would guarantee that his countrymen, the Jewish people, would be saved. So I talked just a short while ago about how far he is willing to go for them. This is how far he's willing to go for them. He is willing to be separated from Jesus if that would guarantee that all of them would be saved. It's not possible, of course, but if it were possible, he would gladly make the sacrifice.
Okay, so that's like my main question is about like specifically that thought where he says like if he were able to save them, he would have his own relationship with God severed, basically.
Right.
I struggle to follow the
logic behind it.
Maybe the logic. I mean, I kind of get the logic, right? Like it's kind of what Jesus did. Although, like when Jesus did it, it was not forever.
Right.
Like, he didn't become permanently separated from the Father.
Right.
I assume he knew that he wouldn't be permanently separated from the Father. I guess it's theoretic. Maybe it's possible he didn't, but I'm pretty sure Jesus knew, like, eventually, I'm going to return to the Father.
Right.
I guess Paul doesn't go into detail. Maybe he is saying like, I cut myself out from Christ, assuming I get to come back at some point. But if we're supposed to, if our relationship with God is supposed to be the most important relationship in our life, it's more important than your friendships, more important than your marriage, your relationship with your kids, then how is it then practical to say, I would rather like give up this thing that should be the most important thing to me, right, even though it is for other people? And again, it's not like it's a selfish move. It's a sacrifice, but just the logic and the thought process behind that is difficult for me to understand how Paul justifies that thought process with like the reality of the importance of your own relationship with Christ.
Well, that's true. I'm going to read, to answer that question, I'm going to read a letter that
from Paul. It's called Romans.
Yep, from Paul. No, I'm just kidding. This is a letter that an atheist wrote to a guy named Ray Comfort. Ray Comfort is an evangelist out on the West Coast. He talks to people about Jesus, and then he's quite famous on YouTube. But there's a letter that an atheist wrote to him. He actually revealed who this atheist is, but I'm not going to reveal it here. But here's what the atheist said. Quote, "Do you consider yourself to be compassionate of other humans? If you're right about God, as you say you are, then how can you sleep at night? When you speak with me, you're speaking with someone who you believe is walking directly into eternal damnation. Yet you stand by and do nothing. You should be running the streets mad with rage at their blindness, because that's equivalent to standing on a street corner and watching every person walk blindly directly into the path of a bus and die. Yet you stand idly by and do nothing. Imagine the horrors hell must have in store if the Bible is true. You're just going to allow that to happen and not care about saving anyone but yourself? If you're right, then you are an uncaring, unemotional, and purely selfish swear word that has no right to talk about subjects such as love and caring. So that's, in other words, what Paul is saying is his equivalent to shoving the whole people of Israel out of the way of that bus. He would rather shove them and put himself in harm's way of the bus rather than watch idly by and do nothing. Ray Comfort also follows this up with a comment. He says, if we have great heaviness and sorrow in our heart for the lost, we'll warn them of the reality of hell and how to avoid it. And Tony Evans too has this question in his study Bible regarding this verse. He says, do you have the same intense grief for those who don't know Jesus? This is him expressing his grief. This is Paul expressing his grief over the inability of the Jewish people to understand what Jesus has done for them. So what Pastor Mike says from time to time also is true. We ought to do anything and everything short of sin to seek and save the lost. Although Paul even goes as far as saying that I would even go as far as separating myself from Jesus, just so if it would guarantee that all of you would be saved. So it's him using hyperbole, using exaggeration, to make the people see and understand what he's willing to go through and why he's willing to go through it. Like, it's that important to him.
Yeah, I think the language is important. Now, I didn't go study it in like the original Greek, but in the ESV, which is a fairly literal translation,
yes,
into English, it's for I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ. He like you were saying, that there's hyperbole in there. He's not cutting himself off from Christ with the hopes that this happens. He's, like you were saying, he's expressing how deep that sorrow is that they're separated from God, and how strongly he desires for them to be connected. But I will say, even like myself, when I read it, it's still like, which is kind of the point of hyperbole, is to like be eye catching or ear catching or whatever. But it's still like rings like, not, I don't want to say false, but like gross in my ears when I hear it. I'm like, no, like I can, like you were reading that quote from, was it Tony Evans, talking about like the grief for those who don't know
grief,
Jesus?
yes, it's Tony Evans.
Like I feel like I can feel that, but I'm still like, I'm not willing up to give up my relationship with Jesus. Like, but that's, again, that's where it's important to understand that Paul, like, he's saying, I wish this. He's using hyperbole because that's not an option. Like, there's no instance where you giving up your relationship with Jesus will be the reason somebody else comes to Christ. That's just true. That's not how it works.
That's true.
This is just Paul expressing how deep that desire is. But it definitely it works, but it also works. Like you can get caught up in it and be like, well, I feel like Paul's way off base here.
I imagine, especially the Jewish people back then, if this letter were being read to them and they were like, what did he say again?
Yeah,
like stop there for a minute. Yeah. What did he say again?
Yeah.
So it's very attention grabbing.
Yeah, definitely.
Because that's exactly what he wanted. Like, he wanted the people listening to him to really sit up and pay attention, and it's like, what? That's how far you're willing to go for someone like me. You haven't even met me. We haven't even talked. It's just your letter reaching our church, and you're willing to go as far as separating yourself from Jesus. Like, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, when we see other people in the Bible that have, I mean, obviously Jesus being the ultimate example of self-sacrifice, or at least putting yourself in maybe harm's way.
Yeah.
It happened a lot in the Old Testament, a million different times.
Right.
Abraham. I almost said Adam. Adam. We already blamed Adam for stuff when we did. Abraham, when he kept going back to God, being like, "All right, I know you couldn't find like 10 people, but what if there's like 5 non-horrific people here?" And God's like, "All right, no, I couldn't do it." But Moses did the same. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that, and I think this is Paul. Not necessarily doing it in this instance, but expressing that same desire for people who are lost to be connected to God.
That's true, and this ought to make us take a second look at love your neighbor as yourself, because many of us put that very same neighbor down our list of priorities because that neighbor was mean to me, or that other neighbor don't go to church, or they go to the other church across the road, or across the street, or down the road, or around the corner, or some other church in town, or maybe out of town, or they don't have the same religion, or we have so many reasons in our minds, like when we connect it with a certain neighbor, they immediately drop down the list of our priorities. But Paul was willing to separate himself from Christ. That's, again, it's not real. He's not saying it as if he really wanted to do it, or he was doing it, but that's how much his grief was. And for us, just because the neighbor shouted at you, or your husband was mean to you, or your wife didn't cook dinner for you, they go down the list of your priorities immediately.
Or your podcast co-host didn't bring you any food.
Yeah.
That would be a reason to move someone down the list.
Oh, yeah, that's so true. That is so true. It's a good thing I did.
Did you? Or is it for next episode?
That's for next week.
All right, so episode 121, I'll get some food. Okay. I'm going to jump us ahead because I want to make sure we don't have another 45-minute podcast.
Okay.
But I want to get to verses 4 and 5 real quick before you move on, because Paul starts talking about all the reasons it's super cool to be an Israelite. and I'm curious as to why, particularly as he's and I know we'll get to that a little more as we get to the next verses, but I'm curious as to why, particularly when he just talked about how they're kind of missing the mark, here's all the great benefits, but he's in this context of he's talking about how not all of you are following, a lot of you are missing
and then he says these are the reasons why being an Israelite is cool.
Right. That's weird.
Well, okay, so he's listing all of these because despite all of the things that he mentioned, they still didn't get it. Because think about it, the nation of Israel received special privileges. What special privileges have they been receiving up until that point? They had the covenants. They had more than one. The Gentiles, those who are non-Jewish people, they had none. Like zero, zilch, nada, not at all, nothing. The Israelites had the law. The Gentiles didn't even know what being the chosen people looked like, or what to do to be the chosen people. They had the unique opportunity to worship God in the temple. All of the non-Jewish people had nothing. They had the promise of a Savior that would come. The Gentiles, again, nothing. So the people of Israel were. He's showing them that this is you, all of us. We are all favored, and we are God's chosen race. And still, despite all of that, You still just missed the point.
It definitely seems to have gone over their head a little bit. But it's almost like he's almost taking shots here. Now, it's part of it's at him. Like, he was one of the Israelites who completely missed them, like missed the mark. And
that's why he had the what's the word? The gumption to
solid word. That is a word my mom would use in this instance.
He had the gumption. He did have the gumption. To
the
really
onus
talk like that. The onus, right? To talk like that because I was one of those,
right.
So that kind of thing. So
because it definitely. And then as we continue in this group of verses we're focusing on, so verses 6 through 13, Paul just kind of like hits it home even harder. Like, you're really screwing up. Like, because he already says was it verse 4? Where was it? Hold on, let me jump back up quick. Verse 3, he basically implies, because he's talking about how for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen according to the flesh. So, talking about Israelites. So clearly he's implying that they've missed the mark.
Right.
And then he talks them up on all this cool stuff they had. And then 6 through 13, he's like, no, I'm really gonna, you didn't get off that easy. Like, here's really how we're gonna talk about how you missed the mark.
Reading this part of the letter feels like, now that I understand it this much, reading this part of the letter feels like you're watching a dad lay it out on his own son.
Yeah, and just the first word of verse 6, like all these cool things, but like we gave you a home and food to eat, and we brought you to school and to sports every night. But you're like, oh, what did I do? Oh, my word! But he really hits him hard from there. So let's talk through those verses now. All these benefits Paul just listed in verses 4 and 5. But man, they really, really missed what God was going for. And then especially, like with the gospel, because I think it's kind of doubled. Like if you haven't been with us on the Grow podcast for that long, when we went all the way through the Bible with Pastor Mike, we did 33 weeks, I think, all the way through the Bible. Yes. And so we talked a lot about the law and kind of the perversion of it into something that God didn't intend it for. And so they had already missed the mark in that regard, right? Oh, yeah. And then the gospel comes, the good news of Jesus is here, and they missed that one too. And you're like, man, not only did you really kind of pervert this perfect thing, the law. We talked about how the law is good just a couple weeks ago. But then God was like, hey, I'm going to bring someone to just fulfill the law and totally change everything. And then you miss that one too. It's like, oh my word. It's a huge miss. But so talk to us a little bit. How did the Israelites kind of end up missing like that?
Well, there are two reasons. Number one, with everything going for them, the Jews were supposed to welcome their Messiah, but most of them rejected Jesus, and that's the truth. Most of them rejected Jesus.
Well, their version of the Messiah in their minds was very different.
Right. It's more like a General Patton kind of thing.
Well, that's very much so. We could go MacArthur for you in the Philippines, even though we won't dive too deep into American history with the Philippines. But that part of it, MacArthur, we're all on board with MacArthur. But it brings you back to the week of the Passover, a week before Jesus is crucified, and as he rides into Jerusalem, the people who were maybe on the fence, or they were like, oh, okay, this looks more like what I was expecting. Like he's riding into Jerusalem, a conqueror here, and he's about to take over. Because that's what they thought the Messiah was going to be. Because, again, the historical context being so important, at the time of Jesus arriving on earth, Israel has been oppressed for a very long time by a very large different number of groups. Currently, they're under Roman authority, and they had failed revolts, and it was a really rough time. And the idea not of someone to save their souls, but to save their people and their nation, that's what they were looking forward to.
That's true.
And that's not who Jesus was for them.
He
wasn't this, great warrior, conquering hero. Although he probably would have been
Oh yeah,
a really great
if
warrior.
he wanted to.
What ancient weapon do you think Jesus? No, we won't dive into that. You can leave that in the comments, but be careful what you type. But that, so that's the Messiah they were expecting, and so Jesus would just be so opposite of their picture of the Messiah. Again, they have their picture of what the law was supposed to be. Now they have their picture of what the Messiah was supposed to be.
That's true.
And as much as we want to sit and pick on them, we do the same thing all the time.
That is
but
so
anyway,
true.
but yeah, so that leads to that rejection of Jesus. It wasn't so much we hate what it's not like every Israelite at the time, every Jewish person was like, I hate the things Jesus is saying. They're just like, this isn't what we were promised. This isn't what I'm looking for. So clearly this can't be the Messiah.
Yeah. So for that one, Paul reminds them and us that not all who are descended from Israel are Abraham's descendants. In the same way, for us, not everyone who calls themselves Christians are Abraham's children. Only those who really receive Jesus into their heart. Again, God looks at the heart. Only those who have a real relationship with Jesus are Abraham's children. The second reason that they messed up is because the people of Israel assumed that their children by physical descent were automatically children of God. Just because you are born an Israelite, you grew up an Israelite, and then you had children who were Israelites, that you're all going to heaven or something like that. So today, unfortunately, we have to admit, many Christian parents do the same. Just because their kids grow up in church or attend kids' church or were baptized, then we talked about this, especially as infants before, or were dedicated or had communion, etc., etc., etc. They're doing all of these things. They think their kids are already have a ticket to enter heaven, no matter what they do, even though their kids act more like prodigals, unfortunately. So so those are the two reasons. So not all who say I am Christian are Christ-like. We have to admit that is true. They're going to say I'm Christian, but they're doing all of these not so Christian things. So not all who say I'm a Christian are Christ-like. Same with the people of Israel. Being a physical descendant of Abraham did not entitle them to the promises and the covenants and blessings of Abraham. Each of our kids, and that's the reason why we talked about this at length before, each of our kids must receive Jesus personally, because only the children of the promise are regarded as descendants. So bottom line, and that's the reason why Paul went into talking about Ishmael and his descendants. The children of the flesh are not the children of God, only those of the promised Isaac.
So let's go to verse 13 before we wrap up here, which we'll get in a little more into this type of stuff next on the next podcast as well.
Yep.
As we continue in chapter 9, but in verse 13, it just says, "As it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated." That's a confusing and difficult verse to deal with, especially as we've talked about the how God looks at our heart and the choice, the free will, the choice we have to follow Him or not, and so what's that about? And also
it was 3 a.m. Paul was writing at the 3 a.m.
Well, yeah. And then we'll talk more about being called and election and stuff next week. But in the verses leading up to that, Paul's talking about election, God's purpose of election might continue. And then he drops the Jacob I loved and Esau I hated.
Yeah.
So that
Strong
brings
words.
up really strong words, and it brings up a lot of questions. And again, I'm not going to get into them now because I know we're going to get into some of them next week. But why don't you talk to us a little bit about that verse?
Just a primer for next week?
Yeah, there you go. Give us a little primer for episode 121.
Well, here's the thing. Paul is basically showing that God has a purpose that will not ever be changed.
Mm-hmm.
His purpose is to love us with his deepest love. Now, the love-hate language that Paul uses here is comparatively similar to when Jesus tells us that we must hate our own father and mother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's not like really literally telling us
Right.
to hate my mom and my dad,
Yep.
or your mom and your dad. It's not literal emotional hate. It just means that God specifically chose Isaac, but basically left Esau alone. So the love-hate language here is for
Chose
the
Jacob.
descendants of the two nations.
Did you mean
God
chose Jacob?
chose Jacob. Oh yeah, chose Jacob. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I just wanted to get to reveal it home. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So God has sovereignly chosen the Israelites, not the descendants
Mm-hmm.
of Esau. So bottom line, and I know this is tough, especially since we are so used to thinking only of ourselves or very self-centeredly in a way. But the bottom line is it's about God. It's not about us. And that has always been Paul's point. It's about God. It's not about us. The world does not revolve around you. The world does not revolve around me or all of us. God is the planner. He has the sovereign right to choose whom he will use for his kingdom purposes. So, yeah, and we'll go into more detail
Yes, we will.
on that next week. So we're gonna no head, heart, and life change for this one. I want us to talk about that towards the end of the chapter when we go to the end of
Which is going to
chapter
be
9.
2 episodes from now, because we're having another book that we're doing
Yeah.
3 episodes on. So,
Yep,
okay.
that's right.
You have some
So-
questions for us, though?
Yes, I
Okay.
do have questions for us. Again, take your pick, answer in the comments. The first one is, because of his love for his fellow Israelites, Paul was willing to be cut off from Christ. Again, not literally for their benefit. So the question is, are there any unbelievers in your life whom you feel similarly toward? Like, is there anybody in your life that you have the same intense grief and that you want them to be saved? To what lengths are you going to share the good news with them? That's tough. The second one is...
I think this is the one for the comments, by the way. Mm-hmm. Answer question 2 in the comments here.
Yes. What can we do to cultivate compassion in us for the people in our lives who still don't believe in Jesus? Yeah, that's so true. Because somebody might be thinking like, I don't know. I have no idea. So your comments might be very helpful to someone. So write your answers in the comments. Number 3, verses 6 to 13 seem to indicate that God failed to keep his word. Seems like it. Have you ever asked a similar question, like, God, did you just fail your promise to me, or something like that? What answers did you arrive at, and how did you get to that conclusion?
And then, so next week we're going to do verses 14 through 29. So make sure we'll answer those questions this week. Also read along with us. Excuse me. So that, again, that's Romans 9, 14 through 29. Read along with us. Come back next time. Apparently there will be food next time.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty excited to eat some Filipino food. One of these days I'll bring some Australian food for you. I'll repay all of the Filipino food with one item of Australian food. That's just how good our food is in Australia, Leo. No, but thank you, Leo. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I know this has been a really detailed and informative study on the book of Romans, and I know a lot of our listeners and viewers have really appreciated it. So thank you for all the work and all the teaching, Pastor Leo.
You're welcome.
Quick reminder, if you haven't yet, subscribe. Make sure that you turn notifications on so that you get notified every time a new episode goes up on Monday mornings, I believe at 6 a.m.
Yes.
I know Leo wakes up at 6 a.m. every Monday morning to watch himself talk on a podcast.
Oh, yeah. I told you I love it.
Yes.
I am the reason why the world
by the way. Didn't you just tell me like a minute ago that it's about
right.
God,
I
not
forgot
about us? That's that hyperbole that Leo was talking about. No, we love you, New Hope family. We're so glad that you've joined us, and we will see you next time.
Ingat.